We'd love for you to get involved. Please reach out to us. We're always looking for volunteers to help run and host programs, and especially with the recent entrepreneurship initiatives. I would love to have your help and support. So with that, I will briefly introduce our speaker today. So Dr. Simon Poole is a scientist, engineer, and entrepreneur with over 40 years experience in photonics and startups in research, academia, and industry. A member of the team that invented what's very important for my industry, and probably everyone who uses their smartphone, the Erbium-Doped Fibre Amplifier at Southampton University. He subsequently then founded a number of successful photonics companies, which have together generated nearly $3 billion in revenues over the past 30 years. Dr. Poole is a fellow of the IEEE and former IEEE Photonics Society Distinguished Lecturer. In 2018, he was made an Officer of the Order of Australia for his contribution to photonics in Australia, as well as being awarded Australia's highest prize for innovation, the Prime Minister's Prize for Innovation. He was awarded the inaugural IEEE Photonics Society Industry Achievement Award in 2023, and it was a pleasure to be able to see him receive that award at IPC. So with that, Dr. Poole, welcome, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Brandon. Excuse me while I just make sure I connect the right screen to the output. Is that the right one coming up there, Brandon?
Let's see, it's loading for me.
Yes, it looks good on my end. Yeah.
Okay.
I see it now too.
Fantastic. Okay, well, thank you for that intro. That is really greatly appreciated. I will be talking today about, as it says here, some of the things that went wrong with startups, as well as some of the things that went right. It's not all horror and horrendous, but there's a lot to be said for the fact that we all make mistakes. We all do things that in retrospect we would have done differently, but that's what we nowadays call experience. And Oscar Wilde nailed it. That experience is the name everyone gives to their mistakes. So by that, I have got a lot of experience. I've also got experience for having been around a long time, hence the grey hair. So just a little bit more about my background. I started off as an electronics engineer, doing electronic design for test equipment. Then as Brandon mentioned, I did a PhD at Southampton, working with the team, and basically I did the first doped fibres down there in the mid-80s. The other thing about that time is I also got my first taste of startups. I was involved with some spin-outs from the university, a company called York Technology, which did instrumentation. I was their 7th employee when they spun out in the early 80s. And also with a company called York VSOP, which made and sold special fibres. In that case, it was highly birefringent fibres and some of the very early rare earth doped fibres, which I actually wrote the data sheets for, and finished up traveling around the US on a Greyhound bus, visiting customers trying to sell. Which was great fun and gave me a real taste for that. That company, VSOP, is still going. It's called FiberCore these days. So it's been around a long time and has been incredibly successful. So great shout out to the team there. In '88, I got headhunted to go to the Socialist Republic of the South Seas called Australia, where I was basically tasked with setting up and building a research group based around specialty optical fibres, particularly erbium-doped fibres for, in that case, it was undersea transmission. So started that in '88 when I arrived here, and built that up to about 60 people over the following 6 or 7 years. And then in '95, it says there, I left the university to do my first startup, and have been basically doing startups of one form or another pretty much ever since. So just to sort of talk about the things that I'm going to talk about. First of all, I'll talk about a company called Index, which became part of Uniphase, became part of JDS Uniphase, that made fibre Bragg gratings for optical communication systems. Why is that not coming down? Oh, there we go. Then I will talk about the company that followed on for that, which is a company called Engana, is now part of, then became part of Finisar, which is now part of Coherent, making wavelength selective switches, and also a thing which may be familiar to some of the researchers here, a piece of kit called the Wave Shaper, which also came out of my team there. And then more recently, a total shift. Everything up until about 2020, my jobs were all in telecom, but I also had a side hustle in developing and working with a team building diagnostic equipment for optometry and ophthalmology called Sci-Light. And when I finished at Finisar in 2020, I moved to Sci-Light full time, doing diagnostic instruments, say for optometry and ophthalmology in the medical space, a very different space from where I spent most of my career. We'll talk about some of the challenges that come of making that large shift in the later stage in your career. So let's start off talking about Index. Index was formed in the mid-90s, in 95 to be precise, September 95. The aim being to commercialize some of the research that the team at Sydney University had been doing. We'd been working on fibre brag gratings for about 5 years. 4 or 5 years at that point, we got into it quite early, and had been looking at applications of these in sensing and in telecommunications. And we had some patents on a way to write fibre gratings, which seemed to be a good idea at the time, because instead of having to have anybody's wrote fibre gratings written knows you have to have a different phase mask for each, a different setup for each grating wavelength you're making. We could do this all with one and some clever optics. And so what we had here was really a technology push out of the university into the marketplace rather than the market pull. However, there was a lot happening at that point. WDM systems were just starting to be developed. Sienna had just announced their 16-channel system, and that was the real lead into this. So there was some things going on in there, and as a result, what became important was the idea of not using these as sensors, because FPGs are great for sensing pretty much everything, but really trying to make them independent, make them stable, get rid of the temperature dependence, the strain dependence of the grating, and so on. So that finished up being our secret sauce. And we literally just started making, we had $50,000 that we borrowed to get this started. I took 3 of the PhD students with me. The reason for doing that was they all had grants, so they continued to be paid but while still working for me in the evenings and weekends. And we pretty much made our fibre gratings on the same equipment that the researchers were using. We couldn't afford to go out and spend $250,000 on a new laser and a fabrication kit and another $250,000 on test equipment, so we just used all of the kit the university had. And we sold gratings to research. And if you're doing a startup in a sort of a technology push, you will know who the players in that space are. You can talk to them. You can find people to sell things to if you can find a way to get into that market. And we survived by doing that, selling a few gratings, and by not paying anybody very much. I basically worked for nothing for the first year when we got this going. As I said, WDM systems were starting to be deployed, and people were using fibre gratings as a way to separate out the different wavelengths of light, but we were struggling to get into that. We couldn't quite find a way to make that work from where we were in Australia, and finding the right product, what we call product market fit, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. But then in mid-1996, about a year after we'd been talking, Fujitsu came knocking on our door. We'd sold a few gratings to the research guys in Fujitsu labs. They played around with them, and they kind of liked what they saw. And Fujitsu at the time was setting up to build, along with Alcatel, this thing called SeaMeWe-3, which is an undersea cable system that runs all the way from Japan through Southeast Asia, around India, up through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal, into the Mediterranean and up to Western Europe. So SEA, Southeast Asia, ME, Mediterranean, WE, Western Europe. And it also had a branch that came down to Australia, as you can see there. This was in the planning stage at that time. And it was the world's longest undersea system, 39,000 kilometers of fiber in there, 39,000 kilometers of cable, sorry. And until very recently was still the longest undersea system. This was built as a 16-channel WDM system, 2.5 gigabits per second per channel, which was pretty much state of the art at the time, and was designed to have 40 gigabit per second capacity totally at switch off. And what you'll see on this is that in the layout of this, there are a lot of places where fibers come out of the main cable and drop down into subsidiary countries or to landing points in other countries. And those are basically fiber brag grading multiplexers. So they're using FBGs to bring out 1 or 2 or 3 fibers, wavelengths at each point, sorry, and drop those down and then bring them back again. So as I said, Fujitsu did half it. They did the Asian end of things. Alcatel had the European end of things, and they met somewhere in the middle around India. And we were looking at these fiber brag gradings and trying to supply those into this program. Now, the problem here is the reliability requirements. You don't want your undersea cable breaking down. If you've got to go out and first of all drag it up from the bottom of the ocean, then fix it sitting on a boat in the middle of the ocean, not a good idea. And for a component like a fiber grading in such a system, the requirement is for 0.1 fit, which is 0.1 failures in time, which is basically a failure in 10 to the 10 hours. So that you work it out and it comes down to 1.1 million years mean time between failures. Now, obviously, that isn't something that you can prove experimentally. So you have to spend a lot of time looking at failure mechanisms and so on. And it turns out that for us at Index, one of our incredible advantages was that one of these guys with a PhD that I brought out with me, his PhD was actually on decay and failure mechanisms in fiber brag gradings. And so we actually had a really deep knowledge of that within the company. And combining that with the capabilities of the grading writing side of things meant that we could build something that would outperform and outlast. We understood annealing, we understood the decays, we could show through appropriate modeling that we could build and manufacture gratings that would last for that period of time. That's quite a big ask. At the time, we were a 6-person company. So we basically won that contract with Fujitsu, which was to deliver 10 gradings every couple of weeks for, I think it was 20 weeks. So it was a big contract. It was $1 million contract. Before that, we've been running on selling a couple of $1,000s worth of gradings a week. And we've gone from that to somewhere, 10 to 20 times that volume. Let's just talk a little bit about this sort of product market fit. This is finding the right market for the product and bringing these two together. And I'll recommend you to read the Startup Owner's Manual by Steve Blank as one of the readings if you're interested in this space. So we had a product. We had a fiber grading which had effectively 0 strain or temperature dependence. There was a need in an undersea, and we had very high reliability. We had a need in an undersea cable for exactly that capability. And the trick then is bringing these two together and that product that you see below, that carefully packaged device, that's got a fiber grating inside it, which is packaged in such a way that all the thermal expansion of the materials of the packaging counteract the dN by dt effectively of the fiber. Now, product market fit is a really important part of getting a product into market. You have to have something that the market wants that fits into what the product needs and marks. But it's not sufficient, as a mathematician would say. The other thing that you have to look at is you have to look at execution. You have to be able to deliver on that product. And that's a whole different ball game in itself. And that's where you really start to deviate from what is experiences of the research side, which is more the product development side, and into the manufacturing and the repeatability of manufacturing and so on. And just to put that into context, even, America's greatest inventor, okay, somebody's going to say Tesla, but I'll say Edison. Thomas Edison had that understanding as well. Despite his ability to imagine the future, he really understood that the key to all of this was execution, not just the vision of where you want to go. But the trouble is that execution costs money. You've got to build the equipment, you've got to buy the materials, you've got to pay the staff to do it. In fact, execution costs a lot of money. It's where the most investment goes when you're doing a hardware startup, is in the execution, not in the product development. It's the usual ratios. Research is 1%, development is 10%, and execution is the remaining 90% of the cost. And in this, the first thing that I sort of learned coming out of this, the first takeaway I want to put in here, is that the thing that matters here in execution is cash. You have to spend money to be able to build stuff. So to meet Fujitsu requirement, we had to spend money that we didn't have. We would be living on the smell of an oily rag, say paying people virtually nothing, just scraping along as a good scrappy little startup. But all of a sudden we had to go from, a grading a week, or maybe 2 to 10, 5 to 10 to 20. And we needed more staff, we needed more equipment. We couldn't continue just using the equipment at the university anymore. We needed to buy all the pieces, all the materials we needed. And one thing you'll learn if you ever do business in Japan is that the Japanese will not pay until at least 30 days after the product delivered. Now, in some cases, that's actually not bad. If you deal with some of the larger companies like an IBM, they will pay on 90 days, net 90. So you're basically waiting for 3 months to get paid after you delivered it. Whereas you've got to spend money up front to make it. So that sort of cash management is really, really critical. So we went out to VCs very quickly. There were not a lot of VCs around interested in the optics space in the mid-90s. Everybody said the market is too small. Nobody could see a way to build a company with $100 million or so of revenue. We believed there was, but nobody would believe us. So we went to banks. No, banks did not understand and would not lend to a small high-tech business. In fact, banks still do not understand and will not lend to small high-tech businesses. They are risk averse and would much rather lend on bricks and mortar or to somebody who's already got money than to a startup who doesn't have anything like that, just some ideas and some belief. So we searching around for solutions. There were really two. One, we could walk away from the contract and say, look, sorry, Mr. Fujitsu, we can't do this. We just don't have the capability. And then we'll go back to living off the smell of an oily rag and trying to find another product market fit that didn't cost so much money to build. Or, and this is really important, you ask the customer for money up front. And of course, we went and asked the customer for money up front. Unfortunately, it's not something that Japanese companies will do. I remember sitting in a meeting with a lot of Fujitsu people up in the Yokohama, on the top of the Fujitsu Labs building there, and basically explaining the situation that we had no, we were struggling to do this, and we might be having to move on to other things, and apologizing for them. And I remember them saying, but Poole-san, we understand your problem. We will ensure that money is provided to you. Fujitsu wouldn't give us the money themselves, so our distributor Rikkei was lent upon by their customer Fujitsu to lend us money. So in fact, we got $250,000 up front. And Fujitsu also said, and by the way, we think that you could use this particular welding technology that we have in Fujitsu to improve even further your product. And so we will be providing you with this technology and sending an engineer to Australia to show you how to use it, which they did, which was incredible. And we finished up starting the process, starting the production. We got the development samples done. We got Fujitsu signed on, and we continued. Sorry, I just got to we started basically building the product. The trouble, it's like any startup, you keep getting these what seem to be life-threatening problems. And we found this. We found that when we started production, as opposed to development, we were getting all sorts of weird things happening. The gratings that we made in Sydney would not have the same properties when they were measured in Fujitsu. The wavelength was shifting and moving around, and at this point, we're looking at something that's going to keep its capability for 1 million years, and that's not a good idea. So Fujitsu stopped production. We stopped production, and we went into, oh my God, we are doomed. Let's stand back. Let's look at this. Let's try and work out what on earth is going on here. What's causing this wavelength shift? What's going to happen long term? Does this wavelength shift keep going? Does it stop? What means? How can we hit these reliability requirements? It turns out, after about 6 weeks of absolutely insane work, where people were pulling 24-hour shifts in engineering and in production, trying to build enough devices to do all the testing that we need, that we found that the root cause of this was actually humidity. Sydney's quite a humid place, and Tokyo in winter is less so. So we were getting humidity into the product here. The glue was absorbing some moisture. It was changing its properties, shifting the center wavelength of the grating slightly. And when you got up to Fujitsu, that changed. The amount of humidity that was the water that was absorbed was changed. And so this thing was moving around, and we were able to show that it was a relatively repeatable and short-term issue, and by appropriate guard banding of the date of the design, we could actually build something that, if you handled it and transported it properly, would be stable. So we were then able to get on with building and making these things, but it was an atrocious period of life. The stress was unbelievable, because we had by this time fully signed up with Fujitsu. They had fully committed to us, and this whole CME 3 program was relying on getting these gratings in. So the company went through an incredible 6 months of literally 24-hour production and testing by the team there. It was still a small team. I think there were 10 or 12 of us by this point. And at the same time, we were in the process of selling the company to Uniphase. Company became JDS Uniphase, became one of the largest component companies, or the largest component company during the telecom boom of 2001. And we got a new logo, new name, new t-shirts, Uniphase Australia. And life changed. We were no longer short of money. It was great to have enough money coming in that you could, if you needed to hire another person, we could do so. We couldn't try and find yet another student who's prepared to work for peanuts. The fact that we were with Uniphase, they were well known, they gave credibility in other markets, so we quickly got additional customers. Unfortunately, all of the stress and strain of the previous 2 years meant that personally I was absolutely shot. So 3 months after we were acquired, and literally just a couple of weeks before my 40th birthday, I collapsed. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about sort of mental health here. So I'll just dial that back down. The stress of the previous sort of 12 months, dealing with a very, very large organization when you have no money, you're in a very, very difficult position, was literally too much. I really could not take that. Combining that with the crazy hours. Once I did a 24-hour stint in production, and then in the morning came off that stint at 9 o'clock in the morning, went down to the airport, got on a plane and flew to Japan. It was that sort of, you know, ridiculous hours that everybody was working, particularly myself as the CEO. And strange as it may seem, I do suffer quite strongly from imposter syndrome. That's the belief that everybody else knows what you're doing and you don't, what they're doing and you don't, and you are therefore a failure and not able to complete the tasks that are there. And the combination of these three was really just mind-blowing for me, literally. And I'd recommend, if anybody's not read it, to read Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg. That's when I discovered what imposter syndrome was. It was not until nearly 15 years, 20 years later that I discovered what this was. Why did I feel like this? Why did I feel like everybody else knew what they were doing and I hadn't got a clue? But it really exists. And I would really very, very strongly recommend that as you as a founder, you are still a human being. You have to think about yourself. You don't see this sort of thing coming. I had no idea. Yes, I was tired. You know, I had 2 small children that I hadn't seen a great deal of in the previous 18 months. But you don't think that you're the sort of person to crack up. For me, I was just driving down the road and the outside lane on the freeway, and all of a sudden I thought, I can't drive anymore. I literally had to pull off at the side of the road and sit there and wait for an hour until I was able to drive and get off the freeway. And, you know, then sort of drive very slowly home. It was quite a horrendous feeling. And it can't realistically work when you're in this state. You know, I was very lucky. The company, Uniphase, was incredibly supportive of what happened. You know, they just spent $8 million buying the company with me at the head of it. And that's part of the reason they spent the money, was because I was there. But I was absolutely useless for them. I couldn't do anything. And I was off work pretty much for 5 months. I slowly went back to work. I started, you know, I'd been the founder and the CEO. I went back and did my first sort of few half days, really as an IT support technician, which I had been in a previous life, and then spent the next 6 months working my way back up to being one of the executive management. I finished up being the technical director rather than the general manager. That was fine by me. I could focus on the technology and not have to worry about some of the others. So please, please, please do not ignore your own physical and mental health. As a founder, as a senior management of a startup, you are really important to that company. Make sure you get sufficient food, exercise, and sleep. All 3 of these things are really important. We'll talk, you know, one of the questions that comes up often is, what about mentors? What about having somebody that you can talk to? That is incredibly important to have that. It doesn't have to be necessarily a mentor in the commercial sense or technical sense. It can just be somebody who helps you get through your life, your personal life, as well as your business life. And you know, I use this phrase, take your time to smell the roses. Really, yes, work hard, but just find some time to go out there, look at a beautiful sunset, whatever is the thing that you love doing. For me, it's music. Um, I did no music whatsoever during the time of Index. There was no time for that. Take the time to smell the roses, listen to the music, spend time with your partners, your loved ones, your family, whatever. So don't, I can't overstate how important this is to really take care of yourself. So I came back to work. The company had continued without me. They'd hired a new general manager who ran the company very, very well. I was back as technical director. We grew extremely quickly over the next 4 years. And for people who are interested in this sort of hyper growth, the book is quite old now. It's probably 25 years old. This book, Crossing the Chasm by Jeff Moore, but it's still a fabulous discussion of the process of going from, even Fujitsu was a relatively small, low volume company through to what we became later. Fujitsu was $1 million a year. We kept on doing FBGs for undersea systems, but you went from $1 million a year to $100 million a year in just under 3 years. So that's massive growth. That really is hyper growth in a manufacturing environment. It's not like software where you can just turn out as many copies of a piece of software as you like. Building hardware is harder, and you have to build the production equipment. You've got to train the staff. It's huge. So we finished up in 2001 with about 330 people working there. We've gone from 6 people in 1997, start of 1997, to 330 in 4 years. I left in 2001. I was again starting to recognize the symptoms of burnout. I'd had enough. I'd done enough, and I left the company in 2001 whilst it was in this rapid ascent, and basically said to my wife, "That's it. I'm done. I'm not going to do any more startups. This one's cost me too much." But the company kept on going. The people. There's some grey hairs on the people watching this webinar will remember the telecom boom of 1991, 1999, where what we're plotting here is basically the revenues of telecom components. So that's the companies like the Uniphases, the JDSUs. During that growth boom period of 1999 to 2001, and the index, JDSU Australia, Fibre Bragg ratings went on a very similar trajectory, slightly lagging in terms of the growth. That's plotted on the right-hand axis. It slightly lagged, so it takes longer to build an undersea cable than it does to build a terrestrial one. But the trouble was that in the crash of 2000 and the boom of 99 to 2001 turned into the crash of 2001, and you can see that the market went down even more quickly than it went up in the previous 2 years. And unfortunately, for the index JDSU, fiber grading stuff, that also went effectively to zero in mid-2003 and was shut down. So the company went from startup to close down in 8 years, generated a few $100 million of revenue, employed hundreds of people, but ultimately that market went away. The submarine business pretty much shut down for the next decade. There was a huge overcapacity. It took a long time to fill that capacity, and it was a very different picture when that started to reoccur. So, having said that, that I said I would not go and go into another startup, I went and got the guitar out of storage. I tried sitting on a horse, didn't really enjoy that. That's a very forced stage smile on that one. But did very much more enjoy the visiting wineries, and this is a friend's winery. It was a friend's winery at the time, which was called Beagle Ridge, in a house that used to be owned by Charles Schulz, the guy who wrote Snoopy, hence Snoopy treading grapes. However, after 6 months or so of that, a good friend who's now, for the last 20 odd years, has been my business partner, and I got together, this guy called Steve Friskin, who is a real star, got together and decided there were things that we still wanted to do in this business. And so we got together and in September 2001 started another company for some strange reason called Engana. This was sort of a next step up from where we were before. Steve was in components, I was in components. We decided that where the market was going. This one was driven by the market requirements, not by technology. When we started the company, we had no technology. It was he and I sitting around a table with a few bottles of wine, trying to work out what was going to happen to optical communications networks over the next decade. And it became clear to us that what was going to happen is that networks would become reconfigurable. In 2001, the reconfiguration was manual. You'd take a patch panel and a new filter and you'd patch that in rather than being able to remotely reconfigure anything. So that's where we went, and we looked at all the things that we could do. Unfortunately, at that time, if you look at the telecom boom crash here, the telecom market was collapsing. So it was not necessarily a good time to be starting a company when the market's just going away. And it wasn't back for a long time afterwards. And similarly, if we reckon we'd need some money for this, financial markets were in a total mess. It was literally days after 9/11 we decided to start the company. But as we'll see, this was actually the right time to start a company like this. We spent the next year working on the product market fit. We got 2 or 3 people who'd also been laid off during the crash work with us, working on looking at how tunable filters as part of this reconfigurable tunable networks would work, and trying to work that and understand the market and so on. And within 18 months, in January 2003, we managed to close some funding. People are not familiar with the venture capital space. A Series A funding is basically the first time you can get external investment into a company. We put some money of our own into to get started, but we raised $5 million in January 2003. For those familiar with the space, we had to sell 51% of the company to raise $5 million. That sounds like we gave up control on day one, but that's not quite true, because 5% of that company was funded by us, of that Series A. So we finished up still having just about control of the company after our Series A. And then we you bring your investors in, brought in a bunch of VCs, which included also Intel and a company from Japan. And then you have to explain to them what's really going on. The market in early 2003, there was still no sign of any improvement. It was still down in the dumps. The forecast is flat, and then the long haul, which was where we were targeting, it was actually down. The forecast was down for the next few years. Companies were dying on their feet. There's a few that had died in the previous couple of months. No M&A, so no chance of selling the company. Wasn't the cheeriest of slides to present at the first board meeting. But it's also important when you're dealing with investors that you are honest with them. We hadn't sugar-coated what was going on. This was a slide that I presented at every board meeting for the next 2 years, and there was very little good news in it. It was really about believing in the long term. Sorry, there's a annotate and shared contact. I'm going to close that down at the moment, if I may. Okay, so we got our money. We continued to run. We continued to develop this filter, I think called Tournois for the techie people out there, and showed that we could make a nice tunable filter, good shape, good extinction, and we went out and we spent an awful lot of time talking to customers. Basically, this is a summary from from March that year, where we were basically going to OFC, and we had a lot of contact customers globally. You know, we were 10 people down in Australia trying to sell into a pretty crappy market, to be honest. And we were continuing to involve this product market fit and finding out what people really wanted, and growing on that way. And what we found is that over that period, over that next 15 months after we got funded, yes, there was a market there, but the filter platform that we were working on, this thermally tuned polymer filter, which we had managed to make work, wasn't what people wanted. We'd spent pretty much the previous 3 years, 2.5 years developing and building this filter. We probably spent, $1.5 million, $2 million doing so, but it wasn't what people wanted. And we needed to move on to something rather than just a simple tunable filter. What was clear is that coming down the track was this idea of wavelength selective switching, WSS, and we needed to get into that space. And we had at this point identified technology, liquid crystalline silicon, or LCOS, that we thought would be the right platform for that going forward. So just a quick background for people not from the telecom space. Wavelength selective switch is something that switches optical signals between different optical fibers on a granular wavelength basis. They allow you to reconfigure networks. They allow you to change the capacity of networks on the fly. Think of them as highway interchanges or on and off ramps for the main network. They are ubiquitous now in the mid-2020s in networks. In 2004, when we were doing this, there were no WSS deployed anywhere. It was very much, this is what we think is going to happen. The way it works, the only technical slide you're going to see in the whole presentation, you have to separate out the wavelengths of light using a prism or a grating, use a liquid crystalline silicon or MEMS device to select and steer individual wavelengths to output fibers, or in reverse, take all of these input fibers and combine them into an output fiber. It's interesting. Okay, sorry. So the learning here is that, yes, you can spend a year, maybe more, looking at getting product market fit. But in the end, you've got to look at what the market size is. The market need for tunable filters still existed. It was, however, clear to us that that market was too small to justify the investment we were in the process we would have to make to address it, and then to support the investment our investors had made. It was around a $30 million a year market, we thought. Turned out it was slightly smaller than that, ultimately. So 2.5 years, if you like, of our lives were wasted developing a product that wasn't needed. WSS seemed to be the wave of the future. We thought that the product market fit was going to be pretty good at that point, but it hadn't been deployed. There was a lot of buzz about what could be done with it, but nobody was deploying it, particularly not in LCOS. LCOS was really a totally new technology platform that nobody had ever used in this space for. MEMS was the way that everybody was going. Get an array of MEMS mirrors and you can switch anything. This was a very different way of looking at things. And really also the thing that comes, that was the huge learning in this, not only the continuing importance of product market fit, is how do you manage your investors? You don't suddenly come in and say, after 2.5 years of working on one product, right, we've decided this week we're going to close this down and start something totally new. That does not work. You have to bring them along for the journey of what is happening and why it is happening. The investors do not like to be blindsided. That slide I put up, couple of slides ago, showing how bad the market was. That was part of the journey for our investors as well. So they really start to understand the market. We were also open about some of the problems we were having in the tunable filter development and what our customers were telling us. It takes time to bring it through so that when you come to say, okay, we're going to now write off 2.5 years of work and a couple of $1 million because we think it's all wrong, they go, yes, okay, we thought that as well. We agree with that. Let's go ahead and do what we want to do. So managing expectation of investors when you're in a company that's raised some money, really important. Coming out of that, the company grew, ultimately became now what is now Finisar Australia, world's largest manufacturer of wavelength selective switches. Still based in Sydney in Australia. The technology LCOS that we invented became the core of what is now flex grid or flexible grid capacity within optical networks, the ability to scale the bandwidth of a switch, and is now used by all of the major WSS manufacturers, our competitors. Interestingly, for this and also for Index, 100% of what has been built has been built for export. There's no customers for the products that we make in Australia. There are customers of the customers. There are Finisar Australia, WSS all over Australian communications and telecoms networks, but they're hidden behind the faceplates of the equipment manufacturers, the Sienas, the Huaweis, the Ciscos, the Alcatel-Lucents, whatever they are this week. And we've done somewhere significantly north of $1.5 billion worth of revenues now out of that factory in Sydney. So it's manufacturing in Australia as well. That's the other part of it. Some of it's done in China, but every WSS comes out of Australia. And over 250,000 WSS have been shipped out of there now. So it's been a very, very successful business. So some learnings after that 20 years, I guess, of working in WSS. And these are sort of not necessarily related to what I've just been talked about, but they're sort of picking them up. Market research. People love selling you market research. I've bought one market research report in my entire life, and I had to have that because I needed one particular graph that I could refer to close a round of funding. They always overestimate demand in the short term. Take up is always longer than the market researchers think it will be, and they underestimate the long term. The market is always bigger, but it takes longer. Now, WSS market was pegged at $100 million a year about 15 years ago, was the market research. Finisar Australia does more than that in a year now, much more than that. Hardware technologies take 5 to 10 years to mature into a viable business. By viable, that means something that is generating cash, is profitable, and is growing, or at least stable. It isn't something that happens overnight. If I look back at the EDFA, that was incredibly fast. That went from a proposed research capability in 85 to first deployment in 1992, 93. It was 8 years. That's a fast one. The LCOS one, say, was somewhere between 5 and 10 years, depending on where you define viable. Operational excellence. We come back to this whole execution side of things. The operational excellence, that is bringing through new products in product development, bringing through your manufacturing is critical. You've got to be able to do that well as a mature company. You've got to be able to build things more cheaply than your competitors. You've got to have better performance than your competitors. There's no such thing as a market with no competitors, by the way. Every market has competition. It would be great to think, we are unique. Nobody can compete with us. There are always going to be competitors. If the market is worth being in, there will be at least 2 or 3 competitors that you'll be fighting every day of the week. When we started in Ghana, which became, say, now Finisar WSS, I joked with our investors that I wanted to turn the company into a software company, not a hardware company. It was only half joking. And I think we're almost now at the stage where we are at the stage where the software is the key differentiator. in how WSS works and how our WSS are designed and built. The integration of design software through combining ZMax with your the other things in the ANSYS suite makes the design of WSS now really a software problem once you have a good model, which takes you 10, 15 years to build. But once you're there, you have something which you can design in software rather than having to do multiple hardware mock-ups. Your manufacturing processes are software programmable, and things like the calibration, so on, are software driven. There's a massive amount of machine learning that's involved in manufacture and calibration of WSS. I hate to call it AI. Some people would. I call it machine learning. But software is the key for the manufacturing processes. And software is the key for operational side as well, to make things easy for customers to manage their networks using your equipment. So software really is the driver of value add. Needs optics at the core, but software is where it's getting driven. And now the last one that I will talk briefly through for the last 10 minutes or so here is a company called Sielight. Sielight is an Australian company. I mentioned right up front that this started as a bit of a side hustle about 10, 12 years ago. It's now morphing very nicely into a real company. Sielight is basically developing this equipment here, which is called a hyperparallel OCT or HPOCT, OCT being optical coherence tomographer. And it is a device which allows you to measure all aspects of the eye very quickly, very precisely, with applications in multiple different diseases and areas. So OCT has been around a long time. It was invented back in 1991. First products came out about 3 or 4 years later from Carl Zeiss. But they've all been the same. Up to now, they've all been the same technology. That technology takes a laser beam, scans it across the eye in a raster shape, and looks at the reflected signal, and then from that reflected signal can reconstruct the layers of the eye. The problem is that you're rastering. It's not an instantaneous measurement. Takes seconds to do a measurement of one raster set, and during that time the eye moves, saccadic motion. The eye is always in movement, so you have to then try and stitch all of these different scans together to make sure they all line up, and then from that reconstruct the eye. Lots of problems in so doing. What we've done in Sielight is we've gone for a totally different approach, and this builds on some of the technologies that were used in telecom. So we took across some of the optical technologies that have been used in telecom and started applying them into the medical space. So instead of a raster scan, what we do is we do 1,000 beams at once. So we have 1,000 beams, or 1,008 to be precise, which at 300 hertz flash into the eye, and each of those flashes we acquire the complete picture using some very clever optics design and some large cameras. Again, camera technology has come on dramatically in the last decade, driven by smartphones, but it allows you to sort of start thinking about using this in medical devices. And we generate a true 3D image with each flash, each shot, each measurement that we take. We get a complete 3D image with all of the points properly aligned with each other, because the exposure time is way, way faster than any motion. And then we can basically just align those 3D surfaces very precisely to overcome any gross motor activity, somebody moving their head and so on, to give us these beautiful high quality artifact 3D image. This is the front of the eye, the cornea and the anterior segment. You can see just the gorgeous quality of that. It's like a TV image almost of the eye. But from that which we can also image all the way to the back of the eye, to the retina, we not only have beautiful images, but we can also get extremely precise measurement data. We can measure very precisely all of the optical surfaces. So what we've got is now ability to do an awful lot more measuring and analysis of the data than has been possible before. And so instead of a patient having to go through typically 5 or 6 different stations to get their eye measured, we can do that all at once very, very quickly, typically sort of 30 to 60 seconds to get all of this data. And given that the problems that we're seeing in eyes are to a large extent age related, the population is aging, the need for high quality data of, for instance, things like cataract progression is really important. This ability to take all of this data at once and provide very precise, repeatable measurements over time is of critical importance for the surgeons, also for the patient's experience. So SciLight today, we developed all of this technology in-house. There was no bringing in of technology from third parties. It measures critical parameters in about 30 seconds. There's over 100 people in the company down in Melbourne, in Australia. And the timeline of this, though, is really interesting. We actually started looking at OCT about nearly 15 years ago, playing around building a simple OCT system. So pretty much as a side hustle whilst we were both working at Finisar. That didn't go anywhere when we first started. We realized that the classical OCT systems were not the way to go. But in 2013, in conjunction with some other founders, we put together a company, the four of us, to look at this. Again, looking at what does the market need, what sort of technologies are out there, how do we bring these together? And a couple of years later, did a technology demonstration. Couldn't put it near any sort of human because this had no sort of safety test or anything, but showed that this flash lamp, this flash technology worked. And then 3 years after that, we did a first product demo. At this point, we were using the founders' eyes as the guinea pigs for this. We understood the risks. They were very, very, very low risks. We were not allowed to use anybody else. We weren't really supposed to use ourselves, but you have to test this out somehow. What we do when you do in this space, by the way, is you have an awful lot of pig's eyes. They're really good as alternatives to human eyes. So we used to have a fridge full of pig's eyes in the kitchen of the company. Another 5 years of product development before we could get to the point where we could actually start to use this in a non-controlled environment. We got our CE, that's European safety certification, and efficacy certification, same for ARTG, which is the Australian one. So that was only last year. 13 years after we started looking at this, we got to the stage where we could now, outside of a clinical environment, we could start to put this into the public domain, have regular optometrists or ophthalmologists using this. We did clinical trials before under controlled circumstances. That's allowed, and that's part of the process. But this was when we could start to actually sell, was in 2023. We could make first product sales outside of a research environment. And this year we got our first FDA certification and we'll be running to product launch. So we've been running now for 11 years, basically by raising money and spending money on developing and building what we believe is really the next generation of optical diagnostic equipment. You know, we're still a small company. We've got some very large competition. We know that our technology is better. We believe we can now build that sales process that will allow us to take on not just the fact that we've got a great technology, which does things better and gives better clinical outcomes, but that we will be able to build a sales channel as well coming out of that. So some quick SciLight learnings before I wrap up here. A bit like in the telecom space, hardware technologies take 5 to 10 years to mature into a viable business. But it takes even longer than telecom to prove the regulatory and deal with the clinical effectiveness. There's a massive overhead in medical compared to telecom. People in telecom used to 1221, 1209, 468, different quality systems. Medical devices, your quality system makes that look like a walk in the park. 13485, which is the baseline medical one, is enormous. Everything you ever say or think almost needs to be documented and proven out. And every time you have a failure in the field, there has to be a massive paper chain generated to understand whether that has any effect on any other devices out there. Those sort of things you do in telecom at a much lower level. Here, this is something that the FDA will come in and will review and just take you to the cleaners if you are not doing things properly. It's really important to understand that regulatory and clinical side of things. But again, and this is what we've seen time and again, software is now the key. And I'll say that, I'll generalize that. Pretty much everything these days, software is the critical thing. Fiber sensors is something I've railed against for many years, Eric, I apologize. But I think they're really coming to their own. Now we have enough software to make the interpretation and be able to provide the data in a way that makes sense. I think that software combined with optics is still an incredibly strong, powerful capability. And I think that, if we're looking at anything, if you're looking at an optics startup, how on earth do you get that so that there is software? We're not talking about trying to build software as a service business, lots of ARR, that would be nice. But software enables you to do things in optics that you couldn't do otherwise. And so to get that value add to an optics design software, the ability to interact with whatever you're doing is so critical. I mentioned along the way a number of books, which I'll just throw here. The Startup Manual, Steve Blank and Bob Dorff, is a great book for thinking about your startup process and working through that. As it says, it's a manual, step-by guide for building a great company. It takes you through the early stages of building a great company. There's a lot more once that book is finished, which is where Jeff Moore comes in. Crossing the Chasm, still a classic book. Really recommend it. Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg. Sheryl has her detractors as well as her supporters. I think that this book is incredible. I say it taught me a lot about myself and a lot about how I work. And then finally, as far as I'm concerned, the best book that exists about business, which is Andy Grove's Only the Paranoid Survive, how Intel stopped making DRAMs and became really the key player in microprocessors. An absolutely brilliant book. Again, it's 25 years old, but everything that's in there is relevant today. It's a book that I read every 2 or 3 years just to remind myself how painful growing businesses can be and how you have to really look every day at what's happening and really focus on the things that will make your business better and not just survive, but grow. Okay, so to finish up, I'd just like to throw another great quote up, this time from Joseph Conrad. It's only those who do nothing that make no mistakes. Yes, anybody who's doing a startup will make mistakes. It's part of the journey. Hopefully you will make different mistakes from the ones I made, but you will learn from them, and I hope come out at the other side as a wiser and hopefully more successful and better person. So thank you very